I am Travis, a 32-year-old software developer who has always been methodical about my finances. Growing up, I watched my parents constantly favor my younger brother Maxwell over me. For 10 years, I secretly saved $250,000 for my dream home, tracking every penny. Then one morning, I discovered my entire savings had vanished from my account. Before I tell you how I discovered my parents' betrayal and what happened next, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever had family take advantage of your trust. My childhood in our middle-class neighborhood in Portland was defined by one constant theme. My younger brother Maxwell was the golden child, and I was the afterthought. This dynamic shaped everything about our family interactions from as early as I can remember. When Maxwell brought home C grades, my parents would celebrate with ice cream and praise about how hard he tried. When I brought home straight, as they would glance at the report card and ask why I had not joined more extracurricular activities. This pattern repeated itself throughout our childhood years, creating an invisible wall between what was expected of me versus what was accepted from my brother. I discovered my natural aptitude for computers when I was 12. Our school had just installed a new computer lab, and while other kids used the machines for games, I became fascinated with how they actually worked. I would stay after school, learning basic programming, figuring out how to create simple websites and small applications. My science teacher, Mr. Donovan, noticed my interest and gave me books on coding that transformed my understanding. When I excitedly showed my parents the first program I created, a simple calculator application, my father barely looked up from watching Maxwell practice throwing a football in the backyard. My mother patted my shoulder and said, "That is nice, Travis, but maybe focus on something that could actually be useful for college applications." Their dismissal stung, but it also taught me an important lesson: I would need to pursue my passions without their approval or support. By 14, I was fixing computers for neighbors and earning small amounts of money. I opened my first bank account without telling my parents, depositing every dollar I earned. While Maxwell received the latest gaming consoles and sports equipment for birthdays and Christmas, I saved and purchased my own computer parts to build increasingly sophisticated systems. My room became my sanctuary, filled with technology my parents did not understand or value. In high school, the pattern continued. Maxwell joined the football team, and suddenly our house was covered in team photos and trophies, despite his position mostly warming the bench. My parents attended every game, cheering loudly from the stands. Meanwhile, when I won the state computer science competition, neither parent could make it because Maxwell had a routine dental appointment they needed to take him to. I graduated valedictorian of my class, earning a partial scholarship to the State University for Computer Science. At my graduation dinner, my father raised a toast, not to my achievement, but to the fact that Maxwell had managed to pass all his classes and would be graduating the following year. I remember gripping my water glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. That summer before college, I landed my first real programming job with a local web development company. The day I moved out of my parents' home at 18 was the first day I felt I could breathe freely. My apartment was tiny, just a studio with barely enough room for my bed and desk, but it was mine. I paid my own rent, bought my own groceries, and made my own decisions. Throughout college, I maintained only the minimum contact required with my family. I would visit on major holidays, sitting through dinners where Maxwell talked about his latest interests while my parents beamed. Each time he switched majors, they supported his journey of self-discovery. Meanwhile, I worked 30 hours a week while maintaining a perfect GPA in my computer science program, receiving little acknowledgement for my discipline and success. After graduation, I secured a position at a respected software company while Maxwell was still trying to figure out what to do with his life. Over the next several years, a pattern emerged. Maxwell would start a new venture. My parents would invest their savings to support him. The business would fail, and they would bail him out. First, it was a food truck, then a lawn care service, followed by an attempt to become a personal trainer. Each failure was framed as a valuable learning experience, never as poor planning or lack of commitment. Despite the distance I had created, I still felt the tug of family obligation. When my mother called asking if I could help with their property taxes after they had emptied their retirement account to fund Maxwell's short-lived sporting goods store, I sent them money. When my father needed a new car after co-signing for Maxwell's auto loan that he defaulted on, I helped with the down payment. Each time my assistance was accepted, without much gratitude, as if it were simply expected. I created a careful balance in my life, professional success, and personal independence, with just enough family contact to avoid complete estrangement. But beneath the surface, I carried the weight of never being good enough, of always being the responsible one who received none of the love freely given to my brother. This contradiction created a constant internal conflict between my desire for family approval and my need for self-protection, a battle that would ultimately come to a head in ways I never could have anticipated. After graduating college, I focused intensely on building my career in software development. I started as a junior developer at a mid-sized tech company in Seattle, working long hours to prove myself. My starting salary was modest at $65,000 per year, but I lived frugally, continuing the habits I had developed throughout college. I rented a small one-bedroom apartment, drove a used car I had purchased with cash, and cooked most of my meals at home. While my colleagues splurged on expensive gadgets and weekend trips, I created a strict budget that allocated 70% of my income to necessities, 20% to savings, and only 10% to discretionary spending. Every raise and bonus went directly into my savings account rather than upgrading my lifestyle. My coworkers often joked about my apparent aversion to spending money, not understanding that I was playing a long game they could not see. By my third year in the industry, I had moved to a larger tech company with better compensation. My salary jumped to $90,000, and I maintained the same spending habits despite the increase. I had also begun educating myself about investing, reading books on personal finance, and meeting with a financial advisor named Sarah Jordan, who specialized in working with young professionals in the tech industry. Sarah helped me diversify my growing savings into a portfolio of index funds, bonds, and a high-yield savings account. We created a 10-year plan focused on accumulating enough for a substantial down payment on my dream home. I had always been drawn to the craftsman-style houses in the older neighborhoods of Seattle with their character woodwork and established gardens. My goal was specific $250,000 for a down payment on a house in the Queen Anne neighborhood, where craftsman homes typically sold for around $750,000. Every 3 months, Sarah and I would meet to review my portfolio and adjust our strategy. She was impressed by my discipline and clear vision. Most clients your age are thinking about vacations and cars, not creating this kind of financial foundation, she told me during one of our reviews. At this rate, you will reach your goal ahead of schedule. Throughout these years, I maintained limited contact with my family. I would visit Portland every few months, usually for Sunday dinner at my parents' house. These dinners followed a predictable script. My mother would fuss over Maxwell. My father would talk about whatever new business idea Maxwell was considering, and I would sit quietly offering minimal information about my own life when asked. I had learned that any success I shared would either be diminished or somehow redirected to benefit my brother. During one such dinner in my 5th year of saving, my father casually mentioned that Maxwell was considering investing in cryptocurrency. He has a real instinct for these cutting-edge opportunities, my father said proudly. He just needs some capital to get started. The returns could be enormous. I noticed my mother looking at me expectantly, the unspoken question hanging in the air. I pretended not to understand the hint and changed the subject. Later, as I was leaving, my father pulled me aside. Your brother could really use some support with this new venture. Family helps family, Travis. Despite my better judgment, I eventually gave Maxwell $5,000 for his cryptocurrency trading, telling myself it was a small price to pay for family peace. Predictably, within 6 months, he had lost it all on high-risk trades and impulsive investments in dubious new tokens. When he called asking for more, I refused, causing a brief but intense family rift that was only resolved when I agreed to help him create a resume for a conventional job. The pattern continued over the years. My savings grew steadily while Maxwell bounced between ideas and jobs, always with my parents' unwavering support. They refinanced their house to fund his food delivery app idea. They co-signed for his apartment when he was evicted from his previous one for non-payment. Each time, they would eventually turn to me to help clean up the financial mess, taking my assistance for granted. By the beginning of the 10th year of my savings plan, I had accumulated just over $220,000 toward my goal. The housing market in Seattle had remained strong, and I had begun casually looking at listings in my target neighborhood. I had expanded my emergency fund, maxed out my retirement accounts, and created multiple layers of financial security. I felt proud of what I had accomplished through discipline and planning. During a family dinner that spring, I made the mistake of mentioning that I was considering buying a house within the next year. The table went silent for a moment before my mother asked about the cost of homes in Seattle. When I mentioned the price range, I saw my father and Maxwell exchange a look that made me uneasy. The conversation quickly shifted to Maxwell's latest business idea, an exotic pet supply company that he insisted would fill an untapped market niche. As I drove back to Seattle that night, I could not shake the feeling that something had shifted in my family's dynamics. The questions about my finances had been more specific than usual, and their interest in my house hunting seemed oddly intense. I dismissed my concerns as paranoia born from years of complicated family relationships. I could not have known then how right my instincts were, or how soon my carefully built financial world would be threatened by the people who should have been celebrating my success. It was a Tuesday morning when my world collapsed. I had just finished my first cup of coffee and was preparing for a day of virtual meetings when I decided to check my investment accounts, something I did routinely at the beginning of each month. I logged into my main savings account, first expecting to see the familiar balance just over $220,000. Instead, I was staring at a balance of $27.14. My first thought was that there must be a website glitch. I refreshed the page, but the number remained unchanged. My heart began racing as I logged into my other accounts one by one. My stock portfolio decimated. My high-yield savings account empty. Even my checking account had been drained, leaving just enough to avoid overdraft fees. I called the bank immediately, my voice shaking as I explained the situation to the customer service representative. "I need to report fraudulent activity on my accounts," I said, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The representative transferred me to the fraud department, where I spent the next hour answering security questions and describing the missing funds. "Mr. Morrison, I see multiple transfers that occurred over the past 48 hours, the fraud specialist explained. "They appear to have been authorized using your credentials and authentication methods. The security questions were answered correctly, and the transfers were confirmed from your registered devices. There were no unusual access patterns that would have triggered our security protocols." "That is impossible," I insisted. "I did not authorize any transfers." "The records show the transfers were initiated from your home IP address using your password and authentication app," she continued. "We can freeze your accounts now to prevent further activity, but you may want to check your devices for security breaches. I am sending you the transfer details for your records." As the email arrived with the transaction logs, a sickening realization began to dawn on me. The transfers had indeed come from my home network, using my credentials. This was not some random hacker or identity thief. This was someone who had physical access to my devices and personal information. I hung up and immediately began scanning my laptop for malware. Within minutes, I discovered unfamiliar programs running in the background. Using my cybersecurity knowledge from work projects, I identified sophisticated keylogging software and screen recording programs that had been sending data to an external email address. An email address I recognized instantly, my father's AGZ. The software had been recording every keystroke, capturing my passwords, security questions, and account numbers. It had been taking screenshots whenever I accessed my financial accounts, sending all this information directly to my father. The installation timestamp showed it had been added to my system 3 weeks earlier during my parents' weekend visit to my apartment. I remembered that visit clearly now. My mother had insisted on cooking dinner at my place instead of going out to a restaurant as we usually did. While she prepared the meal, my father had asked to borrow my laptop to check some sports scores. I had thought nothing of it, handing it over without hesitation. He had spent nearly 30 minutes with my computer while I helped my mother in the kitchen. The depth of the betrayal was staggering. My own parents had deliberately planted spyware on my computer to steal my life savings. The people who should have protected me had methodically planned to rob me of a decade of hard work and discipline. With shaking hands, I called my father's cell phone. He answered on the third ring, his voice casual. "Travis, this is a surprise. Everything okay?" "Where is my money?" I asked, my voice barely controlled. A pause. "What money?" "Do not play dumb. I know about the spyware. I know you emptied my accounts. $250,000 gone. What did you do?" Another long pause, then a sigh. "You should come down to Portland this weekend. We need to talk as a family." "I want answers now," I demanded. "Fine," my father's voice hardened. "The money has been reallocated to a family member who can actually put it to good use instead of sitting on it for years. Maxwell has a brilliant business opportunity that needed immediate capital. As parents, we made the decision that benefited the family as a whole." "You stole from me," I said, my voice breaking. "You committed fraud and identity theft. That was my money, my future." My father's laugh was the most painful part, cold and dismissive. "Thanks for your naivety, Travis. Your money has now secured your brother's bright future. You can always save up again. You are good at that." The mockery in his voice made it clear they felt entitled to what I had built. They saw my savings not as the result of my hard work and discipline, but as a family resource they had every right to redistribute as they saw fit. In their eyes, Maxwell's needs would always outweigh mine, even when it meant committing a crime against their own son. As I hung up the phone, the betrayal threatened to crush me. But beneath the pain, something else was stirring. A calm, calculating anger that would soon give them a response they never anticipated. 3 years earlier, I had experienced a security breach that changed my approach to financial security forever. A data leak at a major retailer had exposed my credit card information, leading to thousands of dollars in fraudulent charges and weeks of stress as I worked to restore my financial identity. That experience had left me with a profound lesson in the digital age. Having only one layer of protection was naive. Working in software development had taught me about redundancy and backup systems. The best security experts I knew all operated on one core principle: assume breach will occur and plan accordingly. I had taken this philosophy and applied it to my personal finances in ways that would now prove fortuitous. What my parents did not know, what they could not have discovered through their spyware, was that the accounts they had emptied represented only a fraction of my actual savings. The visible accounts, the ones I checked regularly from my home computer, contained approximately $30,000, an amount I kept accessible for potential opportunities or emergencies. This was my honeypot, a security term for a system designed to attract attacks while containing limited valuable information. My real savings were distributed across multiple financial institutions under accounts I never accessed from my personal devices. I maintained a separate encrypted laptop specifically for managing these accounts, which I only used on secure networks outside my home. These accounts were registered with a different email address, one my family had no knowledge of, and protected by a series of security measures that would be difficult for even skilled hackers to penetrate. The total in these secured accounts was just over $220,000, the bulk of my decade of saving. The accounts my parents had emptied represented a loss, certainly, but not the catastrophic one they believed they had inflicted. This realization did not diminish my anger or sense of betrayal, but it did give me space to think strategically rather than react from pure emotion. I could approach this situation from a position of power they did not know I possessed. My first call was to Jennifer Lakewood, an attorney friend who specialized in fraud cases. I had met her at a tech conference 2 years earlier, and we had maintained a professional friendship. I explained the situation, including my discovery of the spyware and the recorded conversation with my father. "This is straightforward criminal activity," Travis, Jennifer said after hearing the details. "Identity theft, computer fraud, wire fraud, not to mention the financial theft itself. These are serious federal crimes." "What is my best course of action?" I asked. "Document everything," she advised. "Create copies of all the evidence, the spyware, the transaction logs, the conversation recordings. Then we need to file police reports both in Seattle, where the crime was initiated, and in Portland, where the perpetrators are located. After that, we can discuss civil action to recover the funds, though the criminal case will likely take precedence." Over the next 48 hours, I meticulously gathered evidence. I created forensic images of my infected computer, downloaded all transaction logs, and secured the recording of my conversation with my father. I also set up monitoring on the stolen funds tracking where the money had been transferred. Unsurprisingly, most of it had been moved to a new business account under Maxwell's name, with the remainder going to my parents' personal account. Jennifer helped me file the necessary police reports and contact the FBI's cybercrime division. The federal agent I spoke with, Agent Richardson, seemed particularly interested in the case due to the sophisticated nature of the spyware used. This was premeditated and technically advanced, Agent Richardson noted. The software used isn't something amateurs would have access to. We'll need to determine how they acquired it. As the legal wheels began to turn, I faced a difficult decision. Should I immediately confront my family with the full force of legal consequences, or play along temporarily to gather more evidence about their intentions and possible accomplices? After consulting with Jennifer and Agent Richardson, I decided on the latter approach. The more information I could gather about their plans for the money and any potential assistance they had received in obtaining the spyware, the stronger the case would be. My father called the next day, his tone surprisingly casual. "Travis, we're expecting you for dinner this Sunday. Your mother is making your favorite pot roast." The audacity was breathtaking. They had stolen my life savings and now expected me to show up for a family dinner as if nothing had happened. I swallowed my rage and responded with forced normalcy. "I'll be there. Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself," he replied, sounding pleased with my apparent compliance. "We have some exciting news to share about Maxwell's new business." After hanging up, I sat in my living room staring at the wall. The emotional toll was beginning to catch up with me. Beyond the financial implications, the personal betrayal cut deep. These were the people who had raised me, who should have protected me and celebrated my successes. Instead, they had committed a calculated crime against me to benefit my brother, and now expected me to accept it without resistance. The hurt was profound, but I refused to let it cloud my judgment. My parents had made a critical mistake. They underestimated me. They saw only what they wanted to see: a compliant son who would eventually forgive their transgression because family comes first. They did not see the strategic thinker, the security-conscious professional who had planned for contingencies they could not imagine. As Sunday approached, I prepared myself for the most difficult family dinner of my life. I would sit across from the people who had betrayed me, pretending I had resigned myself to their theft, while gathering the final pieces of evidence needed to bring them to justice. The thought brought no joy, only a grim determination to see this through to its conclusion. I drove to Portland that Sunday, with a storm of emotions raging inside me. The 3-hour journey from Seattle gave me ample time to rehearse what I would say and how I would maintain my composure. I had a small recording device discreetly tucked into my jacket pocket, ready to capture any incriminating statements. Agent Richardson had confirmed this would be admissible evidence, since Oregon was a one-party consent state for recordings. As I pulled into my parents' driveway, I noticed a brand-new Mercedes SUV parked in front. The price tag on that vehicle alone would have been at least $70,000, a brazen display of my stolen money. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of my modest Honda Civic and approached the house I had grown up in, now a crime scene in my eyes. My mother answered the door with her usual smile, acting as if everything was normal. "Travis, so good to see you. Come in, dinner is almost ready." The house smelled of pot roast and freshly baked bread, the familiar sense of my childhood now twisted into something sinister. In the living room, my father and Maxwell sat watching a football game, drinks in hand. Maxwell looked up with a grin that made my stomach turn. "Big bro, good to see you, man," he exclaimed, standing to give me a backslapping hug. I forced myself to return. He was wearing an expensive watch I had never seen before, and designer clothes that still had that new look about them. "Nice car outside," I commented, keeping my tone neutral. "Yeah, just got it yesterday," Maxwell beamed. "Wait till you hear about the business, Travis. It is going to be huge." My father muted the television and gestured for me to sit. "Your brother has secured an exclusive distribution deal for exotic pet supplies across the Pacific Northwest. The investment opportunity came up suddenly, and we had to move quickly." The way he emphasized investment opportunity made it clear he was referring to my stolen savings. "Sounds interesting," I said non-committally. "How did you finance it?" An uncomfortable glance passed between my father and Maxwell before my mother called from the dining room that dinner was ready. We moved to the table, which had been set with the good china usually reserved for holidays. Another sign of celebration at my expense. Throughout the meal, my parents and Maxwell took turns explaining the exotic pet supply business in enthusiastic detail. They had leased a warehouse, ordered initial inventory, and hired 3 employees already. Maxwell showed me brochures for the products they would be selling, from specialized foods for reptiles to custom habitats for unusual mammals. We project breaking even within 6 months and seeing substantial profits by the end of the year, my father explained, with the confidence of someone who had never successfully run a business. Your brother has really done his research this time. I nodded along, asking appropriate questions about their business plan, while noting the complete absence of any acknowledgement of where the startup capital had come from. It was as if they expected me to simply accept the theft and move on, perhaps even congratulate them on their entrepreneurial spirit. After the main course, as my mother was serving apple pie, my father finally broached the subject directly. Travis, I know you were upset on the phone the other day, but I hope now you can see that the family resources are being put to good use. Maxwell needed this opportunity, and you, well, you have always been good at saving. You will have your house eventually. The casual dismissal of 10 years of my discipline and hard work as something easily replaceable pushed me to the edge of my control. My hand tightened around my fork as I struggled to maintain my facade. Family resources, I repeated slowly. Is that what you call my personal savings? Now, Travis, my mother interjected soothingly, family helps family. You would have just sat on that money for years while your brother has a chance to build something special right now. And the spyware, I asked, my voice deadly quiet. Was that also a family decision? Maxwell looked confused, but my father waved dismissively. We did what was necessary. Sometimes parents have to make tough decisions for the good of the family. You will understand someday. I understand perfectly, I said, setting down my fork carefully. I understand that you committed federal crimes against your own son. Identity theft, computer fraud, wire fraud, grand larceny. My father's expression hardened. Do not be dramatic, Travis. This stays within the family. What are you going to do? Call the police on your own parents? On your brother? This is business, not personal. The funny thing is, I said, allowing a small smile to form, you did not get what you thought you got. What are you talking about? Maxwell asked, looking between me and our father. The accounts you emptied, I explained calmly, they only contained about $30,000. A lot of money, certainly, but nowhere near my full savings. My father's face flushed red. You are lying. We saw the balances. Over $250,000 across all the accounts. I shook my head slowly. What you saw were decoy accounts. Honeypots, we call them in cybersecurity. Designed to attract exactly the kind of attack you carried out while protecting the real assets. The color drained from my father's face as the implication sank in. You are bluffing, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I pulled out my phone and opened a banking app they had never seen before, turning the screen to show them a balance of $223,000. My actual savings. Untouched. In accounts you never knew existed, accessed from devices you never had access to. Maxwell's mouth hung open in shock. My mother dropped her serving spoon with a clatter. So, congratulations, I continued, putting my phone away. You committed multiple federal crimes for $30,000. The FBI is already investigating, by the way. They were particularly interested in how you acquired that specific spyware, since it is not commercially available. My father stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. You contacted the authorities against your own family, after everything we have done for you. The irony of his outrage was almost comical. Everything you have done for me, like favoring Maxwell my entire life, like dismissing my accomplishments, like stealing from me, those things. Get out of my house, my father growled, pointing toward the door. Gladly, I replied, standing calmly. But first you should know that this entire conversation has been recorded and will be added to the evidence against you. I would start looking for a good criminal defense attorney if I were you. My father lunged toward me, but Maxwell grabbed his arm. Dad, stop. You will make it worse. As I walked toward the door, my mother followed me, tears streaming down her face. Travis, please, we can fix this. We will return the money. Just drop the charges. We are your family. I turned to look at her one last time before leaving. You stopped being my family the moment you decided I was worth stealing from. What you are facing now are the consequences of your own actions. I stepped outside into the cool evening air, a strange sense of calm settling over me. For the first time in my life, I had stood up to the people who had diminished me for as long as I could remember. The road ahead would be difficult, but as I drove away from my childhood home, I felt something I had not expected: liberation. The weeks following the confrontation unfolded with a momentum I could not have anticipated. 2 days after our family dinner, my parents and Maxwell were arrested at their homes. The local news picked up the story, a sensational tale of parents installing spyware on their adult son's computer to steal his life savings. My name was kept out of the reports at my request, but the arrest of Robert and Linda Morrison made the front page of the Portland Tribune. I received a desperate call from Maxwell from the county jail. Travis, you have to help me, he pleaded, his voice breaking. I did not know they installed spyware. I just thought they were helping me with the business. Please, you have to believe me. Part of me wanted to hang up immediately, but I forced myself to listen. What exactly did you know, Maxwell? Dad told me they had decided to invest in my business idea. He said they had some savings they wanted to use. I never asked where the money came from specifically. I swear, Travis, I did not know it was your money. His story seemed plausible on the surface, but years of witnessing his manipulative behavior made me skeptical, and the timing never seemed suspicious to you. Right after I mentioned buying a house, suddenly they had $250,000 to give you. His silence was telling. Did you know they were monitoring my accounts? Maxwell? Not exactly, he hedged. Dad mentioned he was keeping an eye on your finances to see if you might be willing to invest in the business. I did not ask for details. Convenient ignorance has always been your specialty, I said coldly. You knew something was wrong but chose not to question it because it benefited you. That makes you complicit. The call ended with Maxwell begging me to post his bail, a request I refused. His freedom was not my responsibility, especially when he had been willing to profit from a crime against me, even if he claimed ignorance about the methods. My meeting with the district attorney, a sharp woman named Catherine Phillips, was scheduled for the following week. She laid out the strength of the case against my parents with clinical precision. The evidence is overwhelming, Mr. Morrison, she explained. We have the spyware on your computer with installation timestamps matching your parents' visit. We have the data showing transmission of your keystrokes and screenshots to your father's email. We have bank records showing the transfers. And we have recordings of both your father's phone confession and the family dinner, where they essentially admitted to everything. What kind of sentences are they looking at? I asked, uncertain how to feel about the answer. For the charges of identity theft, computer fraud, wire fraud, and grand larceny, they could face up to 15 years. Given their age and lack of prior criminal record, they would likely serve 5 to 7 years if convicted at trial. Your brother is facing lesser charges as an accessory, probably 2 to 3 years. The reality of potentially sending my parents to prison for the next several years hit me with unexpected force. Despite everything they had done, some part of me still remembered them as the people who had taught me to ride a bike and bandaged my scraped knees. The complexity of those emotions must have shown on my face. Many victims in family fraud cases experience conflicted feelings, Catherine said gently. It is completely normal. But remember, they made calculated choices to harm you. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment. As news of the arrests spread through our extended family, the reactions varied wildly. My father's sister, Aunt Rebecca, called to tell me I was dead to her for turning on my own parents. My mother's brother, Uncle Thomas, reached out to express his support, revealing that my parents had borrowed $30,000 from him 2 years earlier for one of Maxwell's ventures and never repaid it. They have always enabled your brother at everyone else's expense, Uncle Thomas told me. What they did to you was criminal, and you were right to report it. My cousin Allison, who had always been kind to me growing up, sent a thoughtful email. I cannot imagine how difficult this must be for you, Travis. Family betrayal cuts deepest. Whatever happens, Please know you have family who support you and recognize your right to justice. These messages of support were outnumbered by the condemnations. Family friends I had known since childhood sent scathing messages about loyalty and forgiveness. My parents' church community rallied around them, portraying them as loving parents who had made one misguided decision out of concern for their children's futures. The narrative they constructed ignored the premeditation, the spyware, the theft, reducing it all to a family misunderstanding that I had vindictively escalated. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks after the arrests. My parents appeared in court, looking smaller than I remembered, dressed in conservative clothing their lawyer had likely advised. They did not look at me as I took my seat behind the prosecution table. Maxwell, released on bail, posted by a family friend, sat in the back of the courtroom, his expression unreadable. The evidence was presented methodically. Digital forensics experts explained how the spyware worked and traced it back to my father's devices. Financial investigators outlined the money trail from my accounts to Maxwell's new business and my parents' personal accounts. The recordings I had made were played in the hushed courtroom, my father's dismissive voice echoing as he mocked my naivety and claimed entitlement to my savings. At the conclusion of the hearing, the judge found sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. As my parents were led away, my mother finally looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. I maintained eye contact, refusing to look away or show the emotional turmoil I felt. This was the consequence of their actions, not mine. That evening, I received a call from my parents' attorney, Martin Goldstein. Mr. Morrison, my clients, would like to discuss the possibility of a plea arrangement. They are prepared to return the full amount they took from your accounts in exchange for you requesting leniency or possibly dropping the charges altogether. All of the money has already been spent on Maxwell's business and their new purchases, I pointed out. Where would this repayment come from? They are prepared to take out a mortgage on their home to repay you, he explained. They understand the severity of their actions and want to make amends. The offer was telling. Now that they faced real consequences, they suddenly recognized the severity of what they had done. Not when they installed the spyware. Not when they emptied my accounts. Not when they mocked me for trusting them. Only when facing prison time did their actions become problematic in their eyes. I will consider it. I told the attorney, though I had already made my decision. This was not about the money, which I did not actually need returned. It was about justice, about consequences for a betrayal, so profound it had permanently altered my understanding of family. The next day, I informed Catherine Phillips that I would not be supporting any plea deal that significantly reduced the charges or potential sentences. The case would proceed to trial, where my parents would face the full legal consequences of their actions, just as any other defendants would, in a case with such overwhelming evidence. The decision brought me no joy, only a somber recognition that some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt, even when those bridges connect to the people who gave you life. The trial lasted 4 days, a relatively short proceeding, given the mountain of evidence against my parents. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. At the sentencing hearing 2 weeks later, the judge sentenced my father to 6 years and my mother to 4 years in federal prison. Maxwell, who had accepted a plea deal testifying against our parents, received 18 months. Standing in the courtroom as the sentences were announced, I felt no triumph, only a hollow ache where my concept of family had once resided. My parents did not look at me as they were led away. Maxwell, already in custody from his plea arrangement, mouthed what looked like "I am sorry" as he was escorted out. Whether that apology was sincere or another manipulation, I could not tell. The financial resolution came swiftly after the criminal case concluded. The court ordered full restitution of the stolen $30,000, plus additional damages for the emotional distress and legal costs. My parents' home was sold to satisfy the judgment, along with their other assets, including the new Mercedes that had been parked in their driveway that fateful Sunday. When the dust settled, I found myself with more money than I had lost, but the cost had been immeasurable in other ways. I had lost the illusion of family that I had clung to despite years of evidence that it was more myth than reality. The facade had been completely shattered, leaving me to rebuild my understanding of connection and belonging from scratch. In the months that followed, I threw myself into finalizing the purchase of my dream home, a 1,922nd Craftsman in Queen Anne with original woodwork and a bay window overlooking a garden of mature rhododendrons and Japanese maples. The house needed some updating, which gave me a project to focus my energy on as I processed the trauma of the past year. Unexpectedly, family members I had rarely connected with began reaching out. My mother's sister, Aunt Catherine, who had lived on the East Coast most of my life, called to check on me regularly. I always knew Robert and Linda played favorites, she told me during one call. I just never imagined they would go this far. You deserved better, Travis. My cousins James and Melissa invited me to their family gatherings, creating space for me at holidays that might otherwise have been spent alone. We are still your family, Melissa insisted. What your parents did does not change that. These connections, previously peripheral in my life, began to form the foundation of a new understanding of family, one based on mutual respect and genuine care, rather than obligation and blood ties alone. 6 months after the sentencing, I began seeing a therapist specializing in family trauma. Dr. Hendricks helped me untangle the complex web of emotions I had been suppressing, not just from the theft and betrayal, but from a lifetime of being the less favored child. What your parents did was an extreme version of something they had been doing your entire life, she explained during one session. They consistently prioritized your brother's wants over your needs. The theft was simply the most tangible expression of that pattern. Through therapy, I began to recognize how this dynamic had shaped my approach to relationships and success. My self-sufficiency, while a strength in many ways, had also been a defensive mechanism against rejection. My financial discipline, while admirable, had partly been driven by a need to prove my worth in measurable terms. These insights did not excuse what my parents had done, but they helped me understand the context that had made their betrayal possible. Around the 1-year anniversary of discovering the theft, I made a decision to channel my experience into something constructive. I established a nonprofit organization called Digital Finance Security, focused on helping young adults protect themselves from financial fraud, particularly from family members. Statistics showed that family financial abuse was far more common than most people realized. Yet victims often suffered in silence due to shame and complicated emotional ties. The organization offered free workshops, online resources, and one-on-one consultations with financial security experts. We partnered with cybersecurity firms to provide accessible tools for protecting personal financial information. The work was healing in ways I had not anticipated, transforming my personal trauma into a resource for others facing similar situations. As my new life took shape, I received an unexpected letter from Maxwell, now serving his sentence at a minimum security facility in Oregon. The letter was 8 pages long, a detailed account of his perspective on our childhood and the events leading to the crime. I always knew I was the favorite, he wrote, and I exploited that shamelessly. When Dad mentioned getting money from you for my business, I suspected something was wrong. I did not ask questions because I did not want to know the answers. That makes me culpable regardless of whether I installed the spyware myself. I benefited from their crime against you, a crime that was the culmination of a lifetime of them giving me what should have been shared equally between us. I do not expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I recognize the truth of what happened. The letter ended with his hope that perhaps after he had served his time and made genuine amends, we might have some form of relationship in the future. I read the letter several times, uncertain how to respond, or even if I should. After much reflection, I sent a brief acknowledgement, neither promising reconciliation nor closing the door on it completely. Time would tell whether Maxwell's insights represented genuine change or another manipulation. 2 years after the discovery that had upended my life, I hosted my first Thanksgiving in my Craftsman home. Around my table sat Aunt Catherine, Uncle Thomas, and his wife, my cousins, and their spouses, and 2 close friends who had supported me throughout the ordeal. As we shared the meal I had prepared, I looked around at these people who had chosen to be present in my life, despite the complicated family history. I want to thank all of you, I said, raising my glass. These past 2 years have taught me that family is not just about blood. It is about who shows up, who respects your boundaries, who celebrates your successes without jealousy or conditions. It is about connection based on mutual care rather than obligation. I am grateful to have discovered that lesson, painful though the journey has been. As conversations and laughter filled my home that evening, I realized that the betrayal that had nearly broken me had ultimately freed me. I had created a life defined by my own values, rather than my parents' expectations or my brother's needs. I had found people who appreciated me for exactly who I was, not for what I could provide or how I fit into their narrative. The path forward would not always be easy. There would be moments when the absence of traditional family connections would still sting. There would be milestones that would highlight what I had lost. But I had discovered a profound truth. Sometimes breaking ties is not an act of destruction, but an act of creation, making space for healthier connections to grow. As I move forward, I carry this understanding with me. Family can be chosen, boundaries can be sacred, and sometimes the most loving thing we can do for ourselves is to walk away from those who cannot respect our worth, even when those people share our blood. Have you ever had to make the difficult decision to create distance from family members who consistently hurt you? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that protecting yourself from toxic family dynamics is not just acceptable, but sometimes necessary for healing. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that your worth is not determined by how your family treats you, but by the boundaries you set and the life you choose to create.